Before I got sick and had all these chronic problems, my lifestyle consisted of running 5 miles every single day, going to the gym basically daily. I was heavy into the hardcore sciences. My parents kind of pegged everything on productivity standards. How productive I was the meaning of my worth. The more I did, the more I succeeded, the more basically my parents would praise me and give me attention and stuff like that. My younger years, I was always kind of like a problem child. So then when I found out that I think I got this attention from success, it just pushed me even further into the academic realm, wanting to be successful and wanting to be smart. And I never kind of felt good enough. I always felt like I had to compensate, so I had to work harder than other people did to get the success that I felt like was necessary and that would give me the attention that I wanted. So I think back in undergrad when all of this started, I really needed to look more inner to myself for what I really wanted in life. But instead, I was just kind of like obsessed about, getting praise and doing good and being successful and making my parents proud. With all this came a lot of stress, a lot of pressure, a lot of feeling like I was never good enough and feeling, like the overwhelming sense of like I have to do more than what I'm capable of in order to succeed, or more than, and kind of like ignoring what my body was telling me and just doing it anyways. I became like self-obsessed with like running. I had an eating disorder. I had this obsession with being perfect when it came to my grades in undergrad. It didn't matter if I stayed up all night, every night studying. I would just do whatever it took to get the grade that I wanted to get. And in the end, studying hard kind of, I thought, paid off. I got into grad school, which was a really hard grad school to get into for physical therapy. They only accepted 30 students, which a lot of people applied. So this kind of perpetuated the academic realm of things where I felt like, again, I needed to work harder than I could. I needed to be successful, and my value, my life value depended on this grad school program, succeeding in grad school. Some people dropped out. It was a stressful time for a lot of people in the program, but it was even more stressful time for me in the program because I never felt like I belonged in the first place, and my whole value was placed in it as well. So that's kind of a scary situation to be in, to kind of value yourself in a program that is extremely hard and tough and made to be critical. During those 3 years, I continued to run excessively to manage my stress levels. And again, I wasn't really looking in at my inner self at all. I was just kind of focused on this outer perception of doing well and accomplishments and making my teachers happy and being really smart in this already, smart class of mine. And the competition was high, and we didn't do anything like comparing grades or anything like that, like I know they do in law school, but it was more so highly competitive. On top of that, like, you're always doing something wrong and you can always improve somehow. So it was about trying to be perfect again. It was just this trying to be this picture perfect person that I just wasn't, and I was trying so desperately hard to succeed in. Along with the running, I listened to, all starting in kind of like high school, I listened to really loud music and I would just blast music and run, and that's how I'd get through things. And it's like, talk about stimulation overload. And all through undergrad and grad school, studying hard was like my forte. Like, I would always be studying. I would ignore family life, I would ignore my relationships, sometimes I would ignore eating. I would have like 8 to 9 cups of coffee daily. In order to study. And then sometimes I would go out at night and party and then study the whole next day, even though I hardly got to bed. I made it through grad school despite I did fail a clinical, but I was able to make it up. So that was a whole trauma in itself too, because I literally thought I was going to get kicked out of my grad school program. So I made up the clinical. I got through grad school, and then I started working. Working was basically an extension of grad school in a way, because I was just trying so hard. I was working in a skilled nursing facility. I was at really hard buildings that, first of all, was not a fan of physical therapy to begin with, and so I had a lot of trouble with the nursing staff. Being in that type of environment where people were constantly criticizing me and what I was doing wasn't very new to me, because I was already so hard on myself. So I stayed at the building that I was at, even though, I wasn't really treated fairly at the building. I stayed there for about a year, and I was the only employee left after 1 year, including, I think they fired 2 or 3 managers, 3 people got fired, the regional got fired. We had 3 or 4 people that just kind of like walked out. Like, it was crazy. So, and there's a lot of unethical things going on as well. And I stuck around for this. And, coming right out of grad school, there was already a source of trauma and struggling to get by through grad school straight into this job. We finally actually lost this contract to a skilled nursing facility, which means you lose your job because the building is just not happy with the therapy services. So we lost the contract, and I had to quickly find a new job, and I was searching for weeks. I finally found one where I would be the only therapist at 3 different buildings. With this job, I ended up running around all day long, driving an hour away, and then driving to another building, and then sometimes driving to a third building. And then from there, I worked there for like 5 or 6 months, and I finally found another job where there was another physical therapist at the building that I could work with, so I could share a caseload with. It wasn't as stressful. I wasn't the only physical therapist at these 3 or 4 different buildings. So finally, I felt kind of like a relief. At this third job I was at, this is like 2.5 years into working, kind of, at this point. I finally was getting the rhythm of things. I was finally feeling comfortable at this job, and all of a sudden my health started to decline. My cognition started to kind of like become fuzzy. I couldn't remember things that well. I was just having energy struggles. Like, sometimes I just feel like I needed to lay on the floor for no good reason other than I was just so fatigued I couldn't stand it. I just got to the point where I couldn't even focus at work. I went on vacation to Colorado. When I was in Colorado, that's when everything kind of hit with the illness. I went from running, 6 or 7 miles one day to being completely bedbound, staring at the ceiling because I could not move. I went through the whole Lyme diagnosis and all the treatments. For the first time in my life, I couldn't accomplish what I was thinking in my head, that my life was basically over because I couldn't work. God forbid, So I go through thinking this for like 2.5 years, struggling every day, just wanting to get back to my old self. And it just wasn't happening. I was in so much pain and, only sleeping 2 hours a night. My parents, basically, I lived with them, and they just started basically ignoring me. I went from this like highly sought after, physical therapist with a doctorate degree, and like, oh, I was so smart or whatever, and to basically this level of being a couch potato and somebody that was just lazy and unmotivated. And that's how I thought of myself. And even though, I had this illness and I couldn't do anything, I thought that not working and not being productive meant that I was basically like this lazy person. What's worth living when you can't be a productive member of society? Kind of during this phase, I started to realize there was a little bit more to life than working. And I didn't quite figure things out yet about how I wanted to live, but I just knew that there was more to life than being productive. I basically sat on this for like a year, this whole productivity thing, and why I felt the need to be constantly productive. Why I felt this need to be constantly productive was, that's how my parents were raised. There was also in my family a lack of expression. Both my parents don't really express themselves. They don't say their emotions. When I was a kid growing up, I could never express how I felt. Like, I had some panic attacks. I had a lot of anxiety when I was younger. I had sleeping issues. I think a lot of that was diet related because I had a lot of sugar and a lot of gluten like most kids. But just the emotional aspect of not being able to express myself, I think, was so traumatic in and of itself. I didn't know that these feelings were okay to have, and then since I felt like it was wrong to be anxious, and it was wrong to have issues, and it was wrong to complain, it was wrong to say how I was feeling, I just kept all that inside of me. And then I felt like I had to compensate for it later with the schooling and being super smart. You know, I felt like I had to make up for the fact that I was this inadequate person that had these anxieties and struggles and not feeling good enough, and that was my way of making up for it. You know, I still struggle with that to this day. It's something that it takes a lot of time to get over. And eventually, fast forward to the winter of 2018, my condition actually got a lot worse instead of better. Even though I was diagnosed with Lyme and getting treatment, tension built with my mom and and I ended up, and my sensory stimulus was so bad, I couldn't tolerate much of anything. I couldn't tolerate driving in the car, not riding in the car, actually. I couldn't tolerate. I couldn't tolerate the bang of a pot or pan. I couldn't tolerate the light from outside. I couldn't tolerate the cell phone light. If I would get stimulated by any of this source of stimulus, whether it was noise or vision or somebody like talking to me, touching was just out of the question. I got to the point where I got so agitated with any stimulus that I literally had to sit in my room for 12 hours out of the day when I wasn't sleeping, basically just stay up in my room, because if I expressed this to my mom, how frustrated I was, she would get extremely angry at me, basically blaming me for all this sensory stimuli and everything that I was having going on, and not really, taking my feelings into consideration about how I was struggling. That was even more damaging. So it just felt like I couldn't express myself at all in my situation, and everything was my fault.